Hi everybody, Mr. Click here, and today we're looking at chapter 8 of the BFG. Sorry, between Sophie and the BFG, and they were chatting about how fantastic the BFG's ears were, and the fact that he could hear all these different insects, and he could hear flowers, and he could hear even Sophie's heartbeat whenever she was in her room. So the last that he said, the last place that we read up to was whenever it said, suddenly he seemed to lose interest in the conversation. I is getting hungry, he said. It is time for eight. So that sort of gives us an idea of what this next chapter is going to be about. So we're on to page 40 and it's called Snozzcumbers. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelchy tricky problem around here, the BFG said. In this flunking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pig winkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky poo vegetable. It's called the Snozzcumber. The Snozzcumber, cried Sophie. There's no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we is not believing in giants, was we? Today, we is not believing in Snozzcumbers. Just because you believe not to have actually seen something with our own two little winkles, we think it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said. And the humplecrimp? What's that? Sophie asked. And the rapscapple? The what? Sophie said. And the crumpscoodle? Are they animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not very know-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you are an absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool? Sophie said. What I mean and what I say is two different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a Snozzcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but it was much thicker. It was thick around its girth as a perambulator. Sorry. It was black with white stripes along its length, and it was covered all over with coarse knobbles. Here is a repulsing Snozzcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I swoggle it, I mispize it, I dispurge it, but because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky poo Snozzcumbers instead. If I don't, I will be nothing but skin and groans. You mean skin and bones? Sophie said. I know it is bones, the BFG said, but please understand that I cannot be helping it if sometimes I is saying things a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time, the BFG. The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude. There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked. My mother? Cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you is knowing that. I did not know that, Sophie said. Who ever heard of a woman giant? Shouted the BFG, waving the Snozzcumber around his head like a lasso. There never was a woman giant, and there never will be. Giants is always men. Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled. In that case, she said, how were you born? Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears. And that's all there is to it. They simply appears. The same way the sun and the stars. The same way as the sun and the stars. And when did you appear? Sophie asked. Now, how on earth could I be knowing a thing like that? The BFG said. It was so long ago, I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old, very, very old, and crumpling. Perhaps as old as the earth. What happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the BFG answers. Sometimes, and quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing, and nobody is ever knowing where he goes to. But mostly us giants is simply going on and on, like whiffsy time twiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome Snozzcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end in his mouth and bit off a huge chunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like the crunching of lumps of ice. It's filthy, he spluttered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of Snozzcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's dangerous, the BFG gurgled. It's sickable. It's disgustorous, the BFG gurgled. It's sickable. It's rotten. It's maggot-wise. Try it yourself, this foilsome Snozzcumber. No, thank you, Sophie said, backing away. It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you snipsy little winkle. Have a go. Sophie took a small nibble. Ugh! She spluttered. Oh no, gosh, oh help. Ugh. She spat it out quickly. It tastes of frog skin, she gasped, and rotting fish. Worse than that, cried the BFG, rolling with laughter. To me it is tasting of cloak roaches and slime wanglers. Do we really have to eat it? Sophie asked. Or Sophie said. You do, unless you is wanting to become so thin you will disappear into thick air. Into thin air, Sophie said. A thick ear is something quite different. Once again that sad, winsome look came into BFG's eyes. Words, he said, is oh such a twitch-tickling problem to me all my life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I am wanting to say, but somehow or other they are always getting squiddled around. That happens to everyone, Sophie said. Not like it happens to me, the BFG said. I is speaking the most terrible Wigglish. I think you speak beautifully, Sophie said. You do? Cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. You do? You really do? Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anybody is ever giving me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you is not twiddling my leg? Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk. How wonder, Crump, said the BFG, still beaming. How whoopsie splunkers, how absolutely squiffing. I is all of a stutter. Listen, Sophie said, we don't have to eat the Snozzcumbers. In the fields around our village there are all sorts of lovely vegetables, like cauliflowers and carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting? The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. I is a very honourable giant, he said. I would rather be chewing up rotten Snozzcumbers than snitching things away from other people. You stole me, Sophie said. I did not steal you very much, said the BFG, smiling gently. After all, you's only a tiny little girl. So that was a really good chapter, guys, and the BFG uses some really colourful language to describe these Snozzcumbers, which is quite interesting, and actually bits of it were quite hard to read, I think. So what you're going to do now, guys, is you're going to take a look at some of these wonderful adjectives that he's using to describe the Snozzcumbers. Although he's saying them in a negative light, so they're negative adjectives, he's showing just how much he hates these awful, awful vegetables that he has. So have a wee flick through chapter 8 again, and what I want you to do is pause this video and jot down as many Gobblefunk adjectives as you can possibly find. So it's really important that you find loads and loads because you're going to need them for the next bit. So pause the video, get finding all these Gobblefunk adjectives, and good luck! So hopefully you've had enough time to find loads and loads of Gobblefunk adjectives. On this slide here, I've just put a couple of examples that I was able to find, which shows you just how much the BFG hates Snozzcumbers. Now these are only a few. I found repulsant, foilsome, icky poo, maggot-wise, filthing. And then I quite like the phrase where he said, tasting of cloak roaches and slime wanglers. Now I'm not 100% sure what cloak roaches and slime wanglers are, but I can imagine that they don't taste very nice based on the way that he's saying it and the phrase that he's used. So, now that we've thought of all those and how he's actually described this food that he absolutely hates, can you guys have a think? Is there a food that you dislike that much? Something that you would use all these words like repulsant or foilsome or icky poo that you really, really can't stand? I can definitely think of a couple. Have a wee think and jot down the food that you hate as much as BFG hates Snozzcumbers. So hopefully you've all thought of a food that you really, really can't stand. Even the thought of it makes you gross. So this is your turn now. This is your task for today, guys. So using the words that you found, and you can make up your own Gobblefunk words as well, or your own Gobblefunk adjectives. You're going to describe a food that you hate just as much as BFG hates Snozzcumbers. So that food that just makes you go, ugh, you just can't stand it. That's what you're going to do. And you're going to convince me that it is the most disgusting, repulsive food that you've ever had in your life. So, your success criteria and what you should definitely have. So, I would advise noting these down just above where you're going to describe this food. So, identify the food you don't like. Make it really, really clear this food that just, you just can't even stand. Make it really clear what it is. Use a range of the senses, so really make it disgusting to all of the senses. Maybe how it sounds when you bite into it, maybe how it smells, things about how it tastes, maybe how it feels in your hands if it doesn't feel that nice, or even how it looks. It could be awful. So use a range of them and how it repulses each one. So it's quite good to go through each one and sort of go, oh, it's disgusting because it looks like this, and describe it as best you can using Gobblefunk adjectives. You can use other ones as well if you think that's really going to persuade me even more. Use a huge variety of adjectives, so that's the next bit. Use loads of adjectives. You can use online thesauruses where if you put in a word like rotten or gross, then it can give you loads and loads of different words that you can use that mean the same thing, but they just sound a bit better. And then as well, there's the Gobblefunk words that you found in the last chapter, and then any that you want to create yourself as well. So use a range of sentence openers as well. Don't just start off with they are gross because, they are disgusting because, they are this because. Start them off with loads of different sentence openers, and I'll attach a wee resource which gives you loads of different sentence openers. What you will now see is my attempt at using these words to describe a food that I absolutely cannot stand. So this is very short, but it gives you a good idea of what you're sort of aiming for as well in regards to sentence openers, adjectives, and things like that. So let's have a wee look. So I started off by saying there's nothing more icky poo, so I've used Gobblefunk adjective, than Brussels sprouts. Ugh. It is the most repulsivest smell, almost as filthy as frog skins or human beings' toes. When you eat them, they are soft and squidgely, mulching in your mouth as you chew them. Even the appearance of Brussels sprouts is redonkulous, sitting on my plate like little green brains. I would not eat them for all the Snozzcumbers in the world. Thinking about them now just makes me feel awesome. So that was my description. It's quite short, but let's have we think about why that is quite a good example of what to say. So let's take a wee think. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flick through the success criteria and why I think that example met them. So it was really clear the food that I didn't like. I used a range of senses. I used lots of Gobblefunk adjectives. And there was lots of different sentence openers. What I would say is it could have been longer. It could have been a bit more descriptive, and I could have used more ordinary adjectives, so just English adjectives. But that is just a very short example. I know that you guys are going to absolutely blow my socks off and do even better than what I did. So it's now your turn, and you're going to try and persuade myself, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Chad, and Miss Steele that this food that you're thinking of is the most disgusting thing you've ever heard of before. So make sure it's nice and descriptive and you use all the success criteria. So good luck, guys. I can't wait to read all about these disgusting foods, and make sure you use the success criteria and make it as disgusting as possible. Okay, good luck.